not long ago, Dado does, well, I suppose he's just Dado now. Of course, the channel used to be called Dado Does Destiny, but not long ago he did a Destiny retrospective. And since he did that, I got in the mood to kind of talk about how pulse rifles used to be in the game. Now, when Destiny launched, of course, well, I mean, if you were playing during the launch, most people remember that pulse rifles, in comparison to all the other weapons, were not the best. They just did much less damage in comparison to the other weapons, so rarely anyone ended up using them in the end. Of course, in the Crucible, it was alright. In the beta, at least, it was alright. And even in the actual launch, it was okay in the Crucible. It's just you'd get killed by the other weapons much faster if you didn't get the headshots. Like, Red Death is always pretty good because that was the one thing that made it usable to the vast majority of people in the Crucible. And of course, it took quite a long time for them to actually introduce a buff to the pulse rifle class. But as we all know, when they originally buffed it, can't remember exactly when it was. I think it was House of Wolves before they first buffed pulse rifles. So it took until the second DLC for them to actually get to that. It was either House of Wolves or it was already the Taken King by the time it happened. One of those two things. I guess I didn't pick it up. But essentially, once they were first buffed, they were actually on top of the meta. Like, they were much stronger
between our people and the stars. Dead Orbit will pay for their elimination.
They're much stronger in comparison to everything else. So everyone started picking up pulse rifles and then getting as much stability as possible on them as they could. And it was a bit of a refreshing thing to see pulse rifles get that damage increase. Because my favorite weapon class is finally usable. I mean, I always used pulse rifles even before they were buffed. I still used them. I mean, I used scout rifles and auto rifles a bit more, but I still kept my pulse rifles that I liked. But there was an annoying trend starting to happen when pulse rifles came into the meta. People started, well, I mean, I suppose they were doing it with the other weapons, trying to get like a lot of stability, but for pulse rifles it was painfully apparent that stability is something that people were hounding for. It's like most auto rifles, scout rifles, and most of all the other weapon classes, the gun would have good stability, good enough stability to do what you were trying to do, stop. However, when it came to pass that the pulse rifles got their buff, and you had your archetypes that could two-shot finish your enemies in the Crucible, provided that most of your shots from the burst actually hit the head, that's when people started trying to get hyper stability on their weapons, because get that stability fully maxed out. Whereas before then, of course, no one was really worried about that. Honestly, like, the amount that stability actually affects weapons, or pulse rifles at least, like, it's just way too high. Like, if you look back at their statements about how the gunplay was supposed to be before Destiny released, like don't really quote me on this, but I remember, you know what, like I said, don't quote me on this because it could just be like faulty memory at this point, but I believe like they're talking about how like you'd have to learn the weapons and stuff. But I mean, if that's what they intend, if they intended on you having to actually, you know, learn the recoil patterns of weapons, then stability just affects the recoil pattern way too much. Because, for instance, back to pulse rifles when they were bad juju was one of the exotics, because they had many patches to exotics in general, but bad juju, and I believe, sorry, just had a bit of a drink there. Bad juju and I believe thorn, they I can't remember at this point. There was back some time ago, I think around the Dark Below's release. All I know is it was a long time ago. They buffed 2 exotics, and bad juju was one of them. Like they gave them like stability buffs, because bad juju had like kind of terrible stability. Like I know exactly what its original recoil pattern was. I memorized it perfectly. I can't exactly show you that easily on an enemy because they'll kind of move. Actually, you know what? I suppose if I'm at sniper's range, the enemy can't exactly see me. So let me quickly see if I can find an enemy or something to stare at with my scope, and then I can tell you exactly what the original recoil pattern of bad juju was. Let's see. I saw movement all over this way. I mean, that enemy's invisible, so it's kind of... Let me just hop on my Sparrow, because I know there's going to be vandals over here. And I believe at this distance, they still should not be able to see me. I mean, they stare this way. Okay, apparently they can see me, But basically, the original recoil pattern of bad juju, if you shot on the left leg, right about here, it would bounce up, and the second bullet would go about right there in the abdomen, and the third bullet would jump to the head. That was the original recoil pattern of bad juju. Whereas most of the other pulse rifles, if you shot in the abdomen, you'd get your first bullet. Like if you aimed it toward like around the belly button, your first bullet would go there, your second bullet would go about right there where the gun is, and then the third bullet would go in the head. That was the stability of most pulse rifles. And of course, you had your even in the beginning there was still those ultra accurate pulse rifles where you'd shoot like about in the middle of the abdomen, and then it would go from about there to around the shoulder and then into the head. But yeah, the point is, like, before people were worried about the stability of pulse rifles, it's like I enjoyed it a lot more because you had to memorize the exact spots you wanted to shoot them to get it in the head, because pulse rifles, it's not about getting all of your shots in the head, or at least that's how it was in the beginning. Beginning days of Destiny, it was just about learning where you had to shoot to get your precision shot, because if you just aimed at the head, you'd only get 1, maybe 2 rounds in there. But if you aimed at the specific spot you were supposed to, every single round would for sure go and hit the enemy, and then you'd get your last round in the head, which did good enough damage. So yeah, once pulse rifles got their buff, just got all the stability, and then got to the point where you could shoot all 3 shots in the head. I mean, Well, I mean, yeah, you already get what I'm saying there. I already said I enjoyed it more the other way. But I mean, if that's what they're going, if that's what they want to do, then I suppose that's fine. But that's essentially how pulse rifles evolved through the entire course of Destiny. Whereas the evolution of auto rifles and scout rifles is a lot more stagnant. Like, pretty much scout rifles, they've been the same since launch. Like, I mean, they had a couple of minor adjustments, but really nothing of note has happened to scout rifles. They may have nerfed, excuse me, the ammo capacity of scout rifles a couple of times, or did tweaks here and there, but like I said, none of them really matter that much. Auto rifles, on the other hand, as we all remember, when the pulse rifle buff happened, auto rifles, like, they got slammed hard. Like, they took like a back seat, because I believe when they did the first pulse rifle buff, they buffed pulse rifles by about 10%. Excuse me. Took another sip of my drink there. But they buffed pulse rifles by about 10%, and then they nerfed auto rifles by around 3%. And I believe they ended up undoing that 3% nerf later, because it turns out it was too much for auto rifles, and they ended up having to buff auto rifles again later, because like, they took a hard hit. They just became just so obsolete in comparison to pulse rifles and scout rifles when pulse rifles got their major buff that brought them into use by the vast majority of players in Destiny. So essentially you got pulse rifles, which were fairly seen as bad across the board by most users, well, not users, but players of Destiny for the entire life of the game, except for, you know, House of Wolves when they did that patch. And for auto rifles, it's the exact opposite. Like, you know, they were good, reliable since the beginning of the game. In House of Wolves, that patch, they just got put where pulse rifles were. Like, no one wanted to use them as much as other weapons, because they just did better work. Hand cannons. Now, the evolution of hand cannons is relatively interesting, because hand cannons, most of their evolution comes in the comes from the beta. In the beta, hand cannons significantly less ammo capacity, so when the game came out, they got a huge buff when it came to ammo capacity. Like, the most hand cannons would store back in the beta was I think 8 was the maximum rounds you could get in a hand cannon. Like, the vast majority of them had like 3 or 4 shots in them, and then you had your ones with 6, and if you got lucky, you could find one with 8. But that was it. You weren't getting any more than that inside your hand cannon.
Keep your eyes open, Guardians. A high priority
And it was because of this fact
bounty details will follow
that nobody really wanted to use them. But when the game came out, like I said, they got that huge ammo buff. It was, I believe one of the big reasons why people were like, oh my gosh, pulse rifles are good now, is because when the world first people who beat the original raid, which I believe that was Datto's team, like, most of them were using hand cannons. And that's when people realized, wait a minute, hand cannons are actually good. It was around that time when I noticed the hand cannons actually, you know, coming into the picture and being used more. In fact, I was thinking, wait a minute. Like, those were my exact thoughts when I was walking through that raid. Like, wait, hand cannons are actually good now? Because in the beta, like I said, they had just low ammo capacity. I've got no idea what this was either. No idea what that was. I think my thumb slipped or something. But it was just such a shock to me because like hand cannons in the beta, they were just nasty but not good whatsoever. I mean, they were strong like they are now. Actually, I think they were a bit weaker in the beta. I believe they got a little bit of a damage buff as well, ammo capacity buff. But I think they did used to be a little bit weaker in the beta.
Okay, we're good.
Although I'm not 100% on that. It could be that they didn't get any damage buff. But yeah. And of course, later on in the hand cannon cycle, that you had a lot of people like two-shot across the map getting shot with Hawk Moon and stuff like that, and you know, your cross the map shot with the last word. Now that was a weird phenomenon because the last word, like, it had like no range. Like, by comparison to every other hand cannon in the entire game, the last word had like no range. Like, it had the minimum range that you could have on a hand cannon, essentially. I mean, well, not necessarily the minimum range, but the point is, its range was low compared to the average hand cannon. Yet you could still cross the map, two-shot someone before they could even, like, know what happened, essentially. Like, literally, I believe the kill time for last word before they did a bunch of tweaking was literally like a half a second. So like literally like in a half a second someone could cross the map, two-shot you in the head with last word before they did these the tweaks and stuff. And they did, like I said, they did a lot of tweaks with exotics. I think everyone remembers. So yeah, so hand cannons, in light of the situation that people were using them as literal pocket snipers, much like the mare's leg in Battlefield 4 before they nerfed it. Which, of course, in the CTE, like, it was literally like whipping out a sniper rifle as your secondary. How the mare's leg was. But when they actually finally released it in the DLC, it was essentially it was essentially a terrible 44 Magnum. They gave it the exact same stats as the 44 Magnum in Battlefield 4. Whereas Battlefield 3, the 44 Magnum was a lot better. I mean, same rounds. I think most of the stats were the same, except for the fact that when it came to it, the 44 Magnum could one-shot, headshot people like farther in Battlefield 3 than it could in Battlefield 4. And essentially that's what happened to the mayor's leg. But anyway, back to Destiny. The hand cannons, they got that hard slap and became more what they are today. Your your hard-hitting weapon that's good at medium range, but once you get to longer ranges, you start to notice a considerable damage drop-off. Whereas, you know, before you could cross the map, shoot people with junk like Hawk Moon, and you wouldn't notice a difference. Whereas from an enemy being like 2 feet in front of you to an enemy being all the way across the largest map. Whereas people don't worry about stability on hand cannons. It's one of those stats that people don't look for. It's never something they touch on. Because it never needed to be touched on, really. Stability in hand cannons, it's not an issue. Like, you can have a hand cannon with basically no stability, and it's still pretty usable. The reason why I say hand cannons don't really need that much stability is, you know, a lot of people, like, they'll disagree with that, and I admit it is a bit of a flawed statement, but the reason why I stand by the statement is the fact, and this goes back to, once again, I can't remember exactly what they said before the game came out. Like, that was a long time ago. I mean, Destiny's been out for, what, three years total, and it'll be going on 4 when Destiny 2 actually releases. So, yeah. But essentially, you're supposed to take your time and line up your shots with hand cannons. And that's why I say the stability doesn't really matter that much. Because you're supposed to take your time anyway. So taking the time to line up your shot after your stability, you know, levels out is not that big of a drop off. Of course, you know, Crucible, with how fast it is, Crucible is kind of fast-paced. You need a okay stability hand cannon. I'd say it doesn't necessarily need to be middle on the stability, but I'd say it needs to be at least around 1/4 of the stability bar for it to actually be stable enough. And, you know, like I said, you could get by with less stability than that. It's not really that different. The real problem with stability in hand cannons is the fact that when you shoot it, like, as you can see, like, when I shoot it, like, the gun jumps up, but,
keep at it.
like, where it looks like it jumps up, if I were to shoot again while it's still mid-recoil in the animation, that's not actually where it's gonna shoot. Like, I shoot again, as you can see, it still hit that vandal, even though the gun was still pointing up. Hand cannons do not have anywhere near as much stability as it looks like they actually do. That's one of those big issues in gaming that, like, it's super hard to, like, to do anything about the issue of the fact that, like, what recoil actually looks like and the actual representation of the recoil. Wait, I don't think I phrased that right. But the big problem is the fact that how the recoil looks isn't actually what the recoil is. Like, it looks like it jumps up probably about, looks like it should jump up around 2 inches, yet it only moves like a ½ an inch in actuality.
Great work.
And like I said, this is a problem in literally every single game. Like Battlefield, it's a problem in Battlefield, it's a problem in Call of Duty. Although Call of Duty, like, across the board, weapons don't really have that much recoil. Like, I think in every single Call of Duty game ever, the weapon with the most recoil ever was the Barrett 50 cal in Modern Warfare 3. Of course, that would be if you're talking specifically about recoil from the first bullet, because recoil from specifically the first bullet is extremely important, like, for the long run. If your first bullet, for instance, makes you jump up 2 feet, but every additional bullet after that makes you jump up, like, 1/4 of an inch, then, I mean, by 2 bullets, you're 2 feet and 1/4 of an inch up. I mean, of course, an initial recoil of, like, 2 feet would be ridiculous. Obviously, that would never be an initial recoil thing. But the point is, like, the recoil of the first bullet is extremely important to the actual recoil in the long term. Because normally, what games will do is the recoil of the first bullet will be stronger than all the other bullets. Like essentially, it'll just be you get your first bullet, the gun jumps up, say like that much, and then every other bullet makes it just jump up slowly like this. Essentially, is how they tend to do it. But yeah, like I said, if you're just talking about single bullet recoil, then a fair 50 cal for Modern Warfare 3 would probably be maximum. Recoil in general, I don't really know. It's not like I play every single Call of Duty. Plus, I don't really buy them anymore. Kind of just went downhill after a while. But yeah, that's pretty much how the evolution of weapons has gone in Destiny. I mean, shotguns. Well, yeah, I mean, there's some stuff to say about shotguns. Snipers, they didn't really change that much actually. Really, the only thing they changed about snipers is the how easy it is to get your one-shot kills and different like cheeky things that people did. Like I believe they increased the amount of time it takes to actually get an accurate shot when you aim. I think I remember them doing that. Maybe not. Let's see, sidearms. Sidearms have not gotten any buffs or nerfs that were significant. I mean, they've been the exact same as they were when they were brought into the game, essentially. Although, one thing I'd like to see them do with sidearms in Destiny 2, or if you have two hand cannons, I'd like to see like a system where like don't include the armor in the system, but I'd like to see a system where if you use like a hand cannon and a pistol or a hand cannon and a hand cannon, that's a lot of weight reduced. Like this sniper is a lot heavier than if I was carrying a pistol, so I'd like to see like the actual weapons you carry, you physically carry as your 3. I'd like to see that have an impact on your agility as well. So if like someone wants to just be super fast, they could just carry like they could carry 2 hand cannons or a hand cannon and a pistol, and then a I don't know, like a shotgun as their power weapon. Because if you haven't heard, which I mean I'm pretty sure if you're gonna watch a Destiny video to begin with, you already know like Destiny 2, like you've probably already watched its reveal and everything, and know that you're gonna have your primary weapon like usual. Like every weapon that you can have in your primary slot now is gonna be the type, like, you know, hand cannon, scout rifle, pulse rifle, auto rifle. All that's gonna be your primary still. But then you'll have energy weapons where it's essentially you're gonna have the new submachine gun, the sidearm, the hand cannon, scout rifle, pulse rifle, auto rifle. That's what's gonna be in your energy slot. But it'll actually have like an elemental damage like arc, void, or solar. Oh yeah, elements. That's one thing I was disappointed when Destiny actually came out. Like, I was hoping there was gonna be more elements than just 3. But I feel like if they introduced more elements in Destiny 2, like it would be like I just feel like it would kind of just complicate things in the game. So like I feel like if they were going to introduce more elements, they should have done it in the original game. But I mean at this point they're just gonna do what they're gonna do, you know. Like if they're gonna do it, like, then they'll do it. But I don't think they have any plans to add any more elements. Anyway, as I was saying, like shotguns, they got a lot of tweaks. Whereas people around the time Iron Banner? No, I think yeah, Iron Banner. Excuse me. When the first Fellwinter, or whatever that shotgun's called, I believe it was called like a Fellwinter, or